Happy Valentine's, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day, Kiki.
Thank you. That's what I wanted. Okay, so we're all ready to go. Okay, let me begin. Well, good afternoon. And as you know, I'm Rita Kiki Idozi, and I'm the interim dean for the John McCormack School of Policy and Global Studies here at Boston. I'd like to welcome you all to today's, and we're calling it MIIPS seminar. MIIPS stands for McCormack Institutes of International and Public Service. At our school, McCormack's centers and institutes are critical to our academic mission and our public service education model. McCormack Institutes are a bridge to a worldwide community of connections and partnerships with public and private institutions that create meaningful intellectual and experiential exchanges for McCormack's faculty and students. The institutes and centers connect the theory that we teach and learn in our academic programs to real-world practices and in our communities. And finally, they provide our faculty and students with an opportunity to engage community partners in the process of appropriating knowledge in a variety of forms. So today's our fourth McCormack Institutes of International and Public Service seminar series, and it will feature a collaboration between two of our centers and institutes, the McCormack Massachusetts Office of Public Collaboration, we call it MOPC, and our Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development. Today's title is called Addressing Politically Motivated Hate and Political Violence Through Conflict Early Warning, and it's critical in the life's work of both directors, we call him Mads, and Professor Darren Q, and we're joyous to welcome Professor Reyes Paul Telekia from the College of Liberal Arts. Their work is timely, compelling, and impactful. Last November, Time magazine headlined a story called The United States of Political Violence, triggering the surge of harassment, attacks, and violent threats targeting civic and public officials and their families. Let me say a few words of introduction about today's organizers and today's seminar, and then turn it over to them to introduce and moderate the other panelists. So let's start with Professor Darren Q, who is an associate professor in our Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance. Darren studies the connection between democratic institution building in Africa and the development of political cultures that support democracy, particularly in terms of the role of civil society. He is the executive director of the Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development, and has worked with the Council of Foreign Relations, the Center for Preventive Action, and several other blueprints for preventing conflicts in several areas of the world. Welcome, Darren. Let me welcome Reyes Cole Telekia, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name. I just call her Reyes, but she is a professor in the College of Arts, College of Liberal Arts in the Latin American and Iberian Studies Department. She maintains an active public profile in the community. She served in Mayor Walsh's Transition Task Force and Human Services, and at the City of Boston's Diversity Task Force, and the Executive Committee of ARP, and she frequently volunteers as a translator and interpreter for Massachusetts nonprofits. I currently think that she is the commissioner or assistant commissioner for the Human Rights Commission with Mayor Wu's office. And she might want to correct me on the exact title there, but I know that she does work closely with the mayor around human rights on the Human Rights Commission. And let me move to Madhawa Patia, who we call Mads, who is the Associate Director at the Massachusetts Office of Public Collaboration, MOPC. He is the Associate Director of Research. Mads is a conflict resolution practitioner. He's an evaluator, he's a researcher, and he's a lecturer based at the McCormack Graduate School, Policy and Global Studies here. He heads the Conflict Early Warning Analytics Program, CWAP, at the school, and that's a collaboration, as I mentioned before, with the Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development. But the program provides early warning analysis for the Trust Network, which is the first early warning system in the US. Mads is also a co-convener of the Trust Network and the Associate Director of the Statutory State Office of MOPC, I mentioned that. Mads has over 20 years of experience in the conflict resolution field with significant work in the areas of conflict early warning, dispute resolution, collaborative governance, and program evaluation. So let me welcome you all. I mean, that's already the crystal of this program, but we have so many more panelists. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mads and Darren to introduce today's program and the other panelists. Welcome all and happy Valentine's Day again.
Thanks, Kiki. Darren, you want to say something before we get going?
Sure. You want me to introduce the project and then turn to you to introduce the team?
Yeah, let's start with CPDD. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you, everyone. And Kiki, first of all, thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm very grateful, and we're grateful to you for your leadership of the college and for making this event possible. And I want to thank Mads as well, who will say more about the team and the project work. I direct our Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development. We have peace and democracy related programming all around the world, including in Massachusetts. And the genesis of this project really actually, to some extent, was in Nigeria, where Mads and I were doing early warning systems development for local NGOs. And Mads himself brings extensive early warning and early response system development experience from Sri Lanka, where he is from originally. And in 2019, 2020, Mads came to me and said, look, we've got to do this here in the United States. And I think that's an important starting place for thinking about this project is, I think the United States in particular, understandably as a very old democracy, perhaps the oldest by some standards, has this sense of this can't happen here. And I think the events of 2021 and subsequently have really shaken many of us. But to some extent, we are concerned that we have not been shaken enough in the sense that there are some extremely disturbing trends happening in the United States right now. And Mads and his team have been pivotal in convincing me and others that a lot more attention has to be paid to the question of extremist groups in the United States. And Mads and I together wrote an op-ed recently that we can circle back to later, essentially arguing for greater government attention to the problem and greater civil society attention. And we're very hopeful that many of you watching tonight are going to walk away feeling that civil society groups that you know need to be engaged in some of these activities. And we're hoping as well that Massachusetts state and city government will also be interested in trying to focus more light on these activities and convening many of us in civil society together. Because in the end, oftentimes government tends to have more of a law enforcement response to these groups. And although that's an important piece of the puzzle, we need a much broader and deeper engagement of the roots of these sorts of movements. We need to engage the people that are likely to join these movements and try to pull them away from the movements, and people that are already part of these organizations need to be wooed away and brought back into more peaceful engagement of the concerns that they have. So with that, let me turn to Mads. And Mads, do you want to introduce the team and talk a bit about the work and the findings of the project?
Sure, absolutely. If I can share some, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, before I jump into that, I want to kind of piggyback on what Dan was saying about some of the signs. And as you can see, we in the Northeast, these are all hate groups, hate crimes activities, and we are up here in the Boston area. And as you can see a whole bunch of hotspots that have emerged in the Northeast. You know, this is what we call sort of the corridor of hate along the eastern shoreline and sort of the northern shoreline, just as sort of you know, precursor to what we are about to discuss. Now, this is important because we in the Northeast and, as you know, throughout the country, we have actually been somewhat numb to this issue. So the conflict early warning analytics program, which is really you know, sort of a McCormack graduate school based program that has actually worked with the trust network. So we are not really doing this alone. Started back in 2020 when we started noticing sort of the early signs of political violence in the run-up to the 2020 elections. And the trust network was formed soon after that, sometime around September or October. I believe we have one of our co-conveners, Prabha Sankaranarayan, joining us. Thank you, Prabha. And we are essentially the first conflict early warning system. And the CWAP team here is really sort of the analytical hub of the trust network. And we've been doing a lot of data analysis, data collection, cleaning, all these things that we were going to go through. But we started sort of with the idea that political violence can be interrupted. And when we dug deeper and deeper, we found different ways that we can do that. So we are going to today talk, as you saw, the geospatial analysis was what one of the things that I started off with. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the digital trace data, analyzing online content, looking at some of the hotspots, to events data analysis that Mahadi will be doing. We also take a look at some of the radicalized groups, get into some of their group behaviors, some of the ideology, ideological aspects of these groups. So we're going to kind of walk you through some of that and sort of the process of radicalization, how they communicate with each other, etc. Things that we monitor constantly. We also do media monitoring. We're also going to talk a little bit about mathematical modeling and how we can actually develop social cohesion and better policing practices. Because as you know, the community policing aspect or the community police relations is also sort of an area of conflict in this country. And then we will also talk a little bit about sort of the cost of ignoring conflict and this type of data. And hopefully we'll get a chance to hear our Human Rights Commissioner, Reyes, talk a little bit, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. All right. So with that, I am going to turn over to Kelsey.
Thank you, Mads. Can everyone see his screen for me? It's still saying that it's loading, but if everyone else can see it, I can just, okay.
Let me redo that, yeah.
It wasn't just me.
Is it working now?
Okay, yes.
Yep.
Thank you. And can you back up a few slides, I think?
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you want me to start here? Or do you have the digital trace data slide, Mads? Is that the right PowerPoint?
I don't think I put the right PowerPoint slide.
Yeah.
Oh. Sorry.
Okay.
Try that.
There we go.
All right, there we go.
Perfect, looks great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening and bearing with us through these technical difficulties, and happy Valentine's Day to all. My name is Kelsey Edmond. I'm a PhD candidate here at UMass Boston studying public policy, and I'm also an analyst on the Conflict Early Warning Analytics and Policy Project team. Today, I will briefly explain the work that I do on this team, which is primarily working with digital trace data, more specifically Twitter data, but I will also explain what that is, introduce some of the analyses that I run, share what a sample output might look like, and then introduce a hotspot analysis that the team worked on last spring that Mads alluded to. And lastly, I will conclude with some important changes that have been happening at the federal level to hate crime reporting. So what is digital trace data? Well, we very firmly now exist in the digital age, and the behaviors of billions of people are recorded and stored and analyzed on a regular basis. And so as humans interact with technology, all of these little micro actions that we make, whether it's checking a website or making a phone call, all of these minute actions that we do with technology leave behind digital footprints. So digital trace data is the collection of those footprints and the result of social interaction via digital tools and spaces. Oh, I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. Can you go back one slide, Matt? Sorry. So these little traces of digital data are important to analyze because they can potentially provide us with breadcrumbs about where the next political violent event may occur. And while digital trace data comes in all different shapes and sizes, I focus primarily on social media platforms because they generate a vast amount of data on a daily basis on a variety of topics. And Twitter specifically is the most popular platform for academic research because researchers like myself can access large amounts of tweets systematically using an API, and then mine those tweets that users post online. So you can, thank you. So what do I do with those tweets when I get that large data set? I employ a number of natural language processing techniques to help make sense of the tweets. Here I'm going to share a few sample outputs that have been included in reports and bulletins that have been put out by our team. So this first graph on the left is a time series analysis, which is a specific way of analyzing a sequence of data points collected over an interval of time. And in this instance, what you're looking at here is a 2-year spread of tweets that contain the term Antifa protest. So as you can see, it starts in about 2020 and ends in 2022. You can see there are 2 huge anomalistic spikes in the data around June of 2020 and January of 2021, which you can imagine why that might have happened. And another way I explore the data is with word frequencies. So if you can go back to the previous slide, these word frequencies provide insights into how language is used in a collection of natural speech. And this graph here on the right, this is data that's cleaned of all the little tiny stop words like prepositions, and then ordered with the most frequent words at the front. So from that same 2-year data set of Antifa protest tweets, the most common words that are used in conjunction with Antifa and protest are BLM, peaceful, people, Trump, and so on. So the last analysis I'll show is a sentiment analysis. This type of analysis refers to any measures by which subjective information is mined from textual documents. And this analysis takes all of the words in a data set and compares them to a dictionary that already exists, that already has coded words with certain sentiments. And then it will spit out an aggregated total. So this overall general sentiment, this is from the same Antifa protest data set, shows that most of the tweets have a negative connotation, and also a lot of fear-inducing words in there as well. Okay, lastly, on occasion, I might hand code the tweets to better capture some of the common themes. So this, what you see on the right-hand side is just a sample coding structure for tweets that included the year 1776. So that's just a more qualitative way to analyze some of the Twitter data. Next, I will give a brief overview of a hotspot analysis that the team produced last spring. Matt's kind of already introduced this, but we took publicly available data sets from the Anti-Defamation League, Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, which is also known as ACLED, Southern Poverty Law Center, and FBI hate crime data, and ran some descriptive statistics through each of those data sets, and then noted the top 10 cities that demonstrated the most activity in the data set. So then if a city was listed in any of those top 10 tables, we added it to this overall watch list that you see here. And these 4 different data sets do measure different variables. For example, some capture hate crime, while other captures hate groups. So there's no true way to really rank these cities in order of most or least prominent or most hateful. So the cities are just listed alphabetically next to the number of appearances that they have in the top 10 lists. And then we just noted the types of lists that they are showing up in. And lastly, our team wanted to make the community aware of recent changes that the FBI implemented when it comes to hate crime reporting. In 2021, the FBI phased out the summary reporting system and began accepting data only through a new system. And many jurisdictions were not ready to migrate their data reporting over to this new system, whether because of COVID or other factors. And this resulted in missing data from over 7,000 police agencies. And notably, among those missing agencies are 2 of the largest cities in the country, Los Angeles and New York City. So this map here that you see on the right-hand side shows the percentage of the population that is currently covered by reporting via this new system. And you can see those numbers are very low for some of the most populated states in the country. So the lighter colored indicates low reporting numbers. So California, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, et cetera, are all reporting very low hate crimes. And these missing pockets of data are occurring because hate crime reporting is voluntary on state, local, and tribal law enforcement. I did have another quick slide, Mads, but it doesn't seem to be exact preceding that one. But
let me try that.
We have so many different versions of PowerPoint splitting around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I saw it in that one. Great. So if you could share slide number 5. Oh, but that's the
That's the wrong one. Sorry, I kind of messed up this whole thing. No.
I'm happy to just talk through it. as we go in the interest of time. So one other thing that our team is working on is engaging the role of civil society to try to fill in some of these gaps. Some communities have taken it upon themselves to create their own reporting tools, such as mobile apps that instantaneously and anonymously connect citizens to law enforcement so they can confidentially report crime. So there's this one app that I had an example of that's called Stop It, and it's from the town of Somerset, New Jersey. And there are some other community-wide campaigns that are going on, such as the Safe Spaces program. And this is a program where businesses, organizations, churches, whomever can register as an official safe space. They'll receive a decal to put in their window. And that signals to anyone who may be a victim of a hate crime that they can seek refuge in that business or in that location and wait for police assistance. And lastly, these initiatives don't really work without training and education of community leaders because hate crimes can look differently in different regions. So ensuring that local leaders can identify hate crimes and understand the many barriers that people might face in reporting them can help ensure that those crimes are dealt with accordingly. So that is that's the slide. Yeah. And if my colleague is here who can discuss our Google Trend data, I will turn it over to her. If not, we will move on to event data analysis.
Yeah, I don't think she's joined us yet. So what I want to just do a quick roundup of what Kelsey just presented. We have been noticing the reason why we scrape all this data from the internet, from various groups and monitor and use a lot of these secondary data sets as well is the online activities of a lot of these hate groups or right-wing groups we've noticed translate into direct actions on the ground. And in the piece where we talk about the hate crimes ideology, for example, the great replacement theory, etc., we're going to kind of see how those things connect. So it's important to kind of gather these digital trace data to identify what these groups are thinking, how their behavior is changing, how they're growing and expanding. And the hate crime data, one of the things that Kelsey was able to do is was able to identify a 70% growth in the Proud Boys example. And now this organization is active in all corners of the country. Today, this morning, Prabha from the Trust Network, who's with us today, we are looking at the Lehigh Valley, and it's alarming to see how many Proud Boys events have been recorded in that part of the country as well. And we have a very strong presence of the Proud Boys right here in Massachusetts, including homegrown group, which we will discuss. But I think for now, let's try to move to Mahdi. And with this approach, we're trying to look at the correlation between different events. So whether it's protests, however you want to define an event, a protest might have multiple incidents or events within that leading up to it, precipitating events, events that help escalate or de-escalate. So with this work, we are taking a deep dive into events data, capturing this data, cleaning it up, analyzing the data, and finding the correlation. Mahdi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahdi. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Global Governance and Human Security Program. I'm working as an analyst for the CWAP. So mainly what I'm going to talk about is the event data analysis that currently I'm working on. So there is two tracks that we are following. Number one is following the hate and violent events across the United States. Second track is the CWAP approach of event data analysis. I would like to talk about both of them as briefly as I can, but I would like to start with our event data analysis approach. I'll keep talking, Matt, when you find it. So the first track that CWAP, we are trying to develop event data analysis approach. Why this is the case? Number one is that when we are using external data, for example, ECLID, ADL, FBI, all of these even famous event data, we found some problems in it. The problem is that these data sets are very useful for descriptive purposes. For example, let's say it can tell you descriptively what happened, when it happened, the date and time, where it happened and who were involved. But the problem we are having is that we actually, for early warning, we want to know like why the things happened, why the event happened the way it did. We also are starting to notice that there is changes in the events. So all the events are not the same. Even if you take the violent event, violence are not the same across the board either. So we approach the data from the starting point of the question that why do some events turn violent and while others do not turn violent? So we started with some assumptions. We would like to look into the events as a chained together. So the assumptions that we worked on, started on, is that the events are not disparate occurrences. They are chained together. They basically continue in a cyclical manner of action and reactions. So if we want to know why some events happen the way they do, then we actually need to establish some kind of relationship between the preceding events and the following events. So with that idea, we started to pilot a project on the Oregon events data. What we did is that through the May 2020, March 2020, and starting up to January 2022, we collected the events data from Oregon. But what we did is that we structured the data in a way along some variables and categories to understand not only the descriptive part of it, but also why some actors did some actions in relations to what. For example, let's say one of our categories was the framing of the events. Then the other one is the breaking down in the rank order of the violent event. So this slide is one of the sample of that analysis, the preliminary analysis of our data. Is that so? For example, on the y-axis, we can see the different types of violence. For example, it's whether it is in physical assault or vandalism, or whether it is just putting graffiti on something, on some infrastructure, or whether it is just verbal instigations. And what on x-axis we wanted to represent the date of those events and the actors involved in it. And we started to see a pattern emerging between the rank ordered violent events and how they changes over time, depending on who are the actors and when it happened. For example, the lower ranking order of violence has an impact later on to be turned into vandalism or in an assault. We have run some other analysis, but we did not include them here. But what we think is that we just piloting the project on Oregon events, and we would like to expand it to include all other areas. So we have a good chunk of data to test the model. The second track of our event data analysis is following the hate and violent events across the United States. So the first graph is an example of the hate and violent events in Massachusetts. Probably all of you remember that the Boston Globe op-ed from Darren Keogh and Mads. In that we talked about mostly about Patriot Front and and the National Socialist Club. But in this graph, as you can see, this is not only filled with two groups. This is a bunch of groups active in Massachusetts, and they're organizing and having hate events across Massachusetts. One thing noticeable in the data is that from 2005 until around 2015-14, the hate events have been occurring randomly. So no group are associated with organizing those hate events. So that's why you see a big jump in the pink color unknown group. But starting from 2015 and 2016 onward, there's a pattern emerging that those events are not individually separate hate events, but rather organized under a group. And the group has started to emerge from 2015 and onward. The second of events that we would like to talk about is that recently we started tracking the electric grid attack. As you can see from the graph, probably you have seen it in a lot of other places, that an uptick of attack in electric grid and other infrastructure in the United States. So that's the descriptive part, but we want to know more about why this is happening. So we tried a couple of things. Our explorations reveals that infrastructure attack is not something new. So it has not started from 2011 as it's shown in this graph, but it has been common since 1970 and going backward. As much as data we have from the global terrorism data, it shows that from 1970 it has been a regular occurrence. But what is noticeable is that from 1970 up until now, there is differences of groups who are involved attacking the U.S. infrastructure, especially the energy infrastructure. From 1970 up until 1990, it was almost like left-wing group and Puerto Rican independence group attacking those infrastructure. But since almost like after 2000 and onward, especially after 2012 and onward, the pattern has shifted, and now it is more of the right-wing extremist groups are involved in hate crime, in electric grid attack. Can you go to the next slide? For example, the quote from recently convicted 3 right-wing extremist activists who claimed that the possibility of the power being out for many months could cause war, even a race war, and induce the next Great Depression. So their purpose is to cause harm, economic harm to the United States, so that it create a chaos within the country. Now the question is why this is happening. There are a couple of reasons as you have looked into it. Number one, there is a conspiracy theory bumbling around in right-wing media about the Chinese transformer. So the idea is that the United States electric grid are run by Chinese transformers. And these Chinese transformers are equipped with machines and hard disks who are basically spying on US citizens. Number one. Second part of this conspiracy theory is that United States is basically sold out to the to China. Third part of this conspiracy theory is that Donald Trump tried to stop this US selling out to the China. Joe Biden started it again. So it is basically kind of looping around and around along that idea. So how do we know? Because there are many data sets and analyses out there which are kind of not even linked with right-wing media groups. Now, one of the activists also have an interview on 60 Minutes. So that kind of things. Now we have started to dig into it. Then we found out that the United States import data does not have any record of importations of Chinese transformers. It does import transformer from other country, but nothing from China. So there is no trace of it. And there are other issues which are basically not true, not factual. We tried to verify them, but we didn't find anything. these are factless claims from this conspiracy. But we also noticed some other transformations happening, beyond this conspiracy theory. One of them is that we looked into, out of just curiosity, try to see, find out which one are the most attacked states in the US on electric grid, and we try to see whether there is any changes in the production that may have led to unemployment or transformation in the labor sector. It might happen. So just out of curiosity, and we find that in the states that are under most attacks on their electricity grid has been under some kind of transformation in the way that the energy is produced, whether they are transforming from coal or oil or gas to nuclear or solar or some kind of fashions. The third point is that the price hike. There is some kind of price hike, in not much in terms of commercial price hike for commercial users, but for residential users. Now, those are our preliminary investigations still going on before we put out any report about it. But we just wanted to highlight the combinations of descriptive analysis and events analysis with the qualitative analysis. For example, like in Massachusetts hate events, we just had a slide that the frequency of events, but we also wanted to connect that with why this is happening by adding qualitative analysis. And Jack will talk more about why these groups are forming in Massachusetts. Over to you, Jack.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Sherman. I'm a research fellow here at CWAP. I recently graduated from West Boston back in December, and I'm still working with the team. I think we do we have some important things to do here, important things to raise awareness of. So instead of hard data, which the other team members do, I focus more on curating literature and research from across the web, as well as from various reputable and scholarly sources. And I dig a lot into the radicalization of a lot of these groups that we follow and monitor. And one of the most common threads or common grievances that I found when examining them was this idea of the Great Replacement theory. To give a little bit of background information on that, I believe it began, or it was first popularized by this man, Bernard Camus, who was an author from France, who said about, I would say 10, 11 years ago, that there was a conspiracy to eliminate Europe's white population by flooding it with non-white migrants from the Middle East, North Africa, places like that. And we've seen this theory, this false theory, which is not based on anything solid. We've seen it spread a lot the last few years. Several horrific actions have been taken. There was the shooters who targeted a couple of mosques in New Zealand, a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and just last year, a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, have all expressed a degree of belief in this theory. And so this is a really disturbing and alarming trend that we're noticing, and it's definitely something that I think we need to start to pay closer attention to and try to gain a deeper understanding of. So yeah, as you can see, demographic changes will result in the eventual extinction of white European culture, and widely discredited. I mean, yes, anyone who believes in demographics can tell you the United States is significantly less white than it was 20, 30 years ago. This is due to a number of factors, more immigrants coming from places like Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and so forth. Just normal trends that we notice over time. But like I said, this has been used as a form of hate speech and it's been used to justify acts of violence to target immigrants, minority groups, and some other groups of people. And so these groups will use a variety of fundraising methods. They would put online fundraisers, but one of the biggest examples that we saw of this was from about a year ago, the truck convoy in Canada that were protesting the country's COVID restrictions. And because GoFundMe, because they felt that the convoy was not in line with the values that they wanted to promote as a company, they banned people from fundraising for it. And so as a result, the groups who organized it, they started to solicit donations from this other website, GiveSendGo. GiveSendGo is well known for donating to a variety of right-wing causes. It first gained notoriety as raising funds for the legal defense of Kyle Rittenhouse, the young man who was involved in shootings in Kenosha, Wisconsin, during a lot of the unrest that we saw there during the summer of 2020. And they've become known as like this right-wing alternative to GoFundMe for a lot of these right-wing causes and groups. And we also noticed right before the Capitol riot in January of 2021, a lot of these groups who were involved in the riot at the Capitol raised money for gear, equipment, survival tools, and whatnot. So in order to conduct what they want to do, stay financially solvent, a lot of these groups will raise funds through online sources such as GiveSendGo and others. Methods of attacks. Mons, can you just fast forward the slide so I can just see what I wrote forward? I'm so sorry. So methods of attack. So yeah, as you can see there, those are members of a Patriot Front, a right-wing white nationalist group, domestic terror group, getting into a physical altercation with a man at a protest. I think that was in Boston last summer, right before the 4th of July. They marched through Boston with masks and holding American flags and shields. And so the methods of attacks these groups use can vary from group to group. They almost always involve physically confronting counter protesters or people that they have problems with, be they ethnic or racial minorities, LGBT people, whoever it is that they don't like or consider to be their enemy. They'll also conduct online harassment of these people. They'll post their names and addresses and try to incite their followers against them. They'll dox, or as it said, they'll spew hatred against them on social media. Basically, they try to intimidate them or try to like sick their followers on them as a form of intimidation, or it's like a form of domestic terror, you could call it. And basically just using the threat of violence or the specter of violence as a form of intimidation and to try to beat their opponents into submission. And so some of the emerging threats you can see there's the logo for NSC 131. That's short for Nationalist Socialist Club 131. They're a neo-Nazi group that's based here in New England. They operate in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We saw them last year at the St. Patrick's Day parade here in Boston with a banner called Keep Boston Irish and wearing masks at the parade. And a lot of these groups are involved in a lot of can be seen at protests. A lot of them have been seen protesting outside a lot of these drag brunches, drag queen story hour, which a lot of them have taken issue with. And they'll often physically get into it with counter protesters, yell at them. And so we see a lot, we're worried about a lot of these emerging threats because NSC 131, yes, they are still a pretty small-time group. They don't have a lot of notoriety, I would say, outside of New England, but they are definitely somebody we should keep an eye on among a number of other groups. just because of the potential that they could be involved in a lot of these violent acts or potentially incite violence against a lot of these other groups of people. And so, yeah, there's a picture of international exportation. If you follow the news, you probably saw that supporters of the former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, attacked Brazil's parliament building last month after he lost his election, in a not too subtle, homage, you could call it, to the January 2021 Capitol riot, in which supporters of the former US president did the same thing. And so what we're worried is because, the United States is obviously the most powerful and influential country in the world, our goings on, our news, and a lot of the turmoil that we see here as an effect on a lot of these other countries, other places that are going through their own turmoil. And so what we're worried about is that a lot of these other groups are going to try to copy a lot of their tools and methods for raising mayhem and havoc and whatnot. You may have recently seen the news that a pair of neo-Nazis were arrested for trying to destroy Baltimore's power grid. The group behind that, the Atomwaffen Division, a neo-Nazi group, they've developed branches all over Europe, in Britain, Germany, France, Russia, Ukraine, places like that. And so what we're really worried about is that, if these groups are seen as successful or are successful in, causing violence or causing social disruption here in the United States, that could inspire other groups, both in Europe, internationally, or wherever else, to potentially cause mayhem in their countries. And so there would definitely be a kind of copycat effect going on.
Thanks, Jack.
You're welcome.
I'm just gonna jump back into a few slides before one of our analysts is back here with us. So just hang in there with us. Catherine, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm from Montclair, but I've been working with the CWAP team over the last couple months. And the last project I was working on was seeing if the power law could be used we wanted to look at chatter, as we called it, people's search methods, to see if it related to actual events and if there was a relationship between the two of them. So this is just like the beginning stage of it, where we were looking at gas prices and we saw there was a relationship, and we were like, maybe this could be useful in actual political violence. So by doing this, we used all different kinds of events. So we used things like Thanksgiving, which we knew were going to be in the conversation as it led up to it. And then we used just events that happened quickly, like the George Floyd, where no one could have expected that before it happened. So the one thing about Google Trends, though, is that it standardizes it for whatever period of time that you're using. So it's not a number of searches, it's within that search, it's standardized. So you can get the next slide. So one of the first things that we looked up was the attack on the Capitol in 2021. And we thought it was really interesting because it tells you what people are searching in each state. While we know this is obviously not including all searches, because some people don't have their locations on, there is still an interesting relationship that is shown with the power law. And then if you can see, there's like a peak in the beginning, and that's because there was a church attack by the Proud Boys, which made the searches go up during that period of time. So we also wanted to see what happens if we take the Google Trends and also compared it to the event data that's actually happening. So we use the trust networks and the CWAP teams scrape data of actual events compared to the searches only in Oregon. So this is George Floyd search only in Oregon, Ted Wheeler search only in Oregon, all of these are only happening in that state, not including anything else. And we found that there was a really interesting relationship, especially in the beginning, to the actual events that are happening. So if you go further, we can see that as the event happens, people are talking about it more, but also there's more events that are happening. And we wanted to see if this is a consistent thing throughout all different types of politically violent events, ones that are planned, ones that aren't planned, etc. And we found some interesting data from it, but ultimately we had a lot of outliers in the keywords, but we found out a lot of information. But from now, we're taking we're going back to the ACLID and the ADL and taking that data together. And I'm looking for ways to predict the type of events that are going to happen, whether they're going to be politically violent or peaceful, as well as the scale of where they're going to happen. So we want to just try and basically figure out if we can find a significant relationship and hopefully be able to prepare communities as best as possible using possibly machine learning methods.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. The organ, that was just that was a specific data set that the CWAP team has already had. So we use that one as like a trial method per se.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
All right, so next up is we're doing some analysis on some research on social cohesion. The Trust Network, one of its stated purposes is actually to improve social cohesion in the US. Several elements to that: political, social, economic, integrity, and togetherness. A number of indicators, that demonstrate social cohesion. But we also want to look at the impact of policing and community police relations, because we, as Catherine pointed out, we have seen these spikes happen each time there's police brutality, or even before that. So it tends to be in a cyclical nature that violence tends to happen, erupt on our streets as a result of sometimes the police brutality. So over to you, Christina Angelivska, who will present this.
Thank you very much, Matt. Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here today. My name is Christina Angelivska. I'm a Fulbright graduate student at the Department of Conflict Resolution, McCormack Graduate School from North Macedonia, and I recently joined the CWAP initiative as an early warning analyst at the Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development. Just to briefly reiterate what Matt said, my research and analytical approach is specifically focused on reshaping the approaches of the law enforcement, especially community policing, and dive a little bit deeper into the pillars of modern policing, intervention and prevention, and how they should be reshaped in the society, especially in the community policing and policing officers' approach towards tackling politically motivated hate crime and violence. I will be briefly talking about the issues and that reduce actually social cohesion in the society and how policing is connected to that, but also the opportunities from a programming perspective, that is what can be done by enforcement and other key stakeholders in the society. To begin with, I would briefly speak about the issues that the United States has encountered in a time span of 3 years, that is between 2020 and 2023. Especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States has experienced growing social and political polarization. I'm sorry, Matt, can you go to the slide back? Yeah. Rising political violence that led towards group grievances such as Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and All Lives Matter, and also increase in radicalization by extremist groups such as the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Militia, and Patriot Prayer. Yes, some of the issues that have happened and have led towards challenging social cohesion in the country is the citizens' lack of public trust in the police. There is recently, the most recent documentary that was filmed in 2022. It's called Dialogue Club America. And the concept of policing was named as one of the heavy hitters by one of the participants in the documentary. And unfortunately, one of the most recent occurrences that happened in Memphis with the police brutality of Tyre Nichols has dropped the confidence of the American citizens significantly. Americans are increasingly doubtful that law enforcement officers are properly trained in using appropriate force and in intervention and violence prevention in the period between 2014 and 2023. And this is based on a survey pool distributed by Washington Post and ABC. And it's very important to notice that declining trust has been noticed on behalf of White Americans and Hispanic Americans in this 2023 survey compared to an ABC survey that was conducted in 2014. For example, in December 2014, 54% of survey respondents were confident or expressed confidence in the police versus a decrease of confidence in 2023 that is of 39%. Also, additionally, in the survey that was distributed back in 2014, 44% of survey respondents did not express confidence in the police versus an increase of 60% in 2023. But also, as I mentioned, we propose some programming analytical tools that we think should be implemented by law enforcement agencies and officers, especially in reshaping the curriculums and standards for training of community police officers. One of the tools that I introduce here is the so-called polarity mapping tool, which is developed in the United States by Barry Johnson from Polarity Partnerships Organization, and is largely used in Geneva, Switzerland by the Geneva Center for Security Policy, especially with the trainings that they develop and work with law enforcement officers, especially their course Leadership in International Security, also known as LISC. This is an analytical tool, as I mentioned, polarity mapping, which is designed with the aim of to provide polarity approach to continuity and transformation. And it's developed with the aim of mapping polarities, that is differences in the society, to increase polarity awareness, balance the opposite poles, discover more of the whole reality, and make meaning of results through 4 steps: seeing the differences in the society, assessing the differences, learning, and leveraging. And the other one is known as the cycle of socialization, also developed in the United States by Professor Bobby Harrow. It's called cycle of socialization. I put this concept, actually method, here because I believe that we should be aware of the cycle of socialization. What are the factors that influence us, how we behave, and factors that shape us as human beings and make us identify with the social identities that we have in the society. This cycle of socialization actually is an analytical tool that is designed to provide understanding about the implicit biases that each and every one of us holds in the society, microaggressions and stereotypes, and it's based on 5 stages of socialization. The first one is at the beginning, where actually we have pretty much limited information or no information about biases, stereotypes, prejudices, history, or the surroundings in the society. The other is the first socialization, where we are influenced by the institutions, legal system, practices, language, patterns of thought on conscious and unconscious levels. And that is largely enforced into privileges in the society, discrimination, empowerment that may be enforced, and it leads to the results of anger, dehumanization, guilt, ignorance, self-hatred, horizontal violence, inconsistency, crime, etc. And the core at the center of the cycle, every single one of us experiences fear, ignorance, confusion, and insecurity. And it's upon us to decide what are the directions for change and actions to be taken so that these things largely change.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay. And just briefly, if we have time for the recommendations, Mats.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and just very briefly, I would like to to summarize these concepts with a few recommendations that we believe should be largely implemented, specifically, let's say in Massachusetts and Boston, to be considered by the Massachusetts Peace Officer Standards Training Commission and the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, which is an internal oversight mechanism as part of the city of Boston, and also by civil society actors, academia, and other relevant key stakeholders. Polarity mapping and cycle of socialization with no further ado should be utilized with the aim of transforming the criminal justice system, not reforming, but transforming it, remodeling police interventions from local level upward, not the top down, with the aim of enhancing police community relations through reaching understanding and about the polarities and biases that we hold in the society, and also local interventions to be replicated, adapted, and scaled into structural interventions in order to increase trust in the police and improve social cohesion. And here I also mentioned the cross-cutting collection of policing and social cohesion indicators, because I believe that these recommendations provided here are very much interconnected to strengthening the indicators of policing and social cohesion, that is the relationship between security and citizenry and the rule of law, one of the most important pillars of democracy, transparency, and accountability. That's all on my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So the last piece of the puzzle is really the cost of ignoring all of this. So we moved from mapping, all the threat assessments with hard data through desktop research, identifying hate groups, ideological landscape, moving towards sort of ways to tackle some of that, including policing and how that is actually escalating and could actually help de-escalate if properly used. Now we are kind of highlighting another issue, which is the cost of ignoring all of this. For that, we have Karina joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Mads. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm Karina, and I'm a research associate at MOPC and also an analyst for CWOP. So today I'm going to briefly go over some of the data that I've found on the cost of inaction on domestic terror, using two examples, the Boston Marathon bombings and then the Buffalo shooting as well. So for the Boston Marathon bombings, I found that this event inflicted millions in damage to the local economy, according to some preliminary estimates. So based on reports and interviews with local businesses and authorities, here are some figures that kind of hint at the ultimate financial impact of the bombing. So one rough calculation estimated that the cost of artificial legs for the 14 people who lost their limbs could exceed $9 million. Similarly, One Fund Boston, which was established by the city and state to aid marathon victims, collected roughly around $23 million. Total business losses within the Boston Police Department's designated impact zone was around $10 million as well. The cost to Abe and Louie's, which was a restaurant on Boylston Street, was about $500,000, with similar costs for other restaurants nearby as well. Similarly, the value of tickets for canceled events such as the Celtics Pacers NBA game, the Boston Symphony concert, the Blue Man Group performance, and the New England Aquarium was $1.3 million, $175,000, $105,000, and $130,000 respectively. So in terms of transportation, some lost fares for just one day of MBTA costs was around $1.5 million. Finally, the cost of holding a federal prisoner for 1 year costs around $25,000, while holding a prisoner in a supermax prison costs even more, around $75,000 a year. Additionally, according to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had to utilize some emergency federal law enforcement assistance program funds, the EFLEA, around $2 million of those funds to respond to and investigate the bombings. Lastly, the U.S. Department of Justice's Office for Victims of Crime announced an $8 million grant to provide to organizations that really work directly to assist the victims, witnesses, and first responders that were involved in the events surrounding the bombing. So for the Buffalo shooting, shortly after this happened, Mayor Byron Brown testified at a House Financial Services Subcommittee hearing on some of the short and long-term economic impact of mass shootings on local communities. So in this hearing, Mayor Brown shared that in just 2 weeks after this shooting, 30 departments, police officers, and sanitation spent over $500,000 in unbudgeted money. And this really, it really costs, the state a lot of money. So this really happened due to the emergency medical care that they provided at the scene of the shootings, as well as police investigation, as well as some of the more long-term effects, such as healthcare and some of the criminal justice costs, to really make sure that the citizens feel safe. So overall, these two examples really show that there's a really high cost of inaction, and that we should really be making sure that there's systems in place to really address these issues, so that we're not costing communities that are already struggling financially money that they really don't have. And of course, the human cost is the most important part of this, but the financial cost is definitely super high. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our presentation of data and information. And I would like to open the floor for anyone who has anything to say. Yes, I wonder if Professor Reyes, you have anything to share to get us off?
I hope so.
Yes, I think that Professor Reyes is going to be our discussant, so we should give her ample time to do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Reyes.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I think I'm going to take 5 minutes, and I'm going to try to help contribute a little bit to this presentation by posing some questions for discussion or for further thought. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League, last year, the city of Boston was targeted by white supremacist groups 32 times. A year before, 2021, Boston was targeted 37 times. But there were not attacks in 2005, 2010, or 2014. It appears that politically motivated hate exploded sometime between 2016 and 2020 in Boston. Last year, white supremacist actions in Boston included propaganda, harassment, vandalism, altercations, and assaults. And the groups that were involved in the city were the Patriot Front, Revolt Through Tradition, the Nationalist Social Club, Massachusetts born, and the Bay State Active Club. The actions of the groups sought to recruit new members, intimidate and frighten residents and institutions, and disrupt democratic processes. So it stands to reason that civic organizations and researchers, watchdogs, community organizations, leaders, and elected officials are sounding the alarm or the alarms. And you all, thank you very much. You've made a very strong argument for the need to develop a three-pronged strategy, one that considers prediction, preparation, and prevention. For my part, I would like to offer 3 sets of questions that hopefully can help advance your positions. I have divided these questions in 3 groups: rights, data, and civic society. I'm going to go through them, and then if you want, we can pick on them, or we can open the floor for anybody to comment or answer. Let's start with the rights. 2 years ago, in 2021, the Southern Poverty Law Center came out with a statement against the creation of a new criminal domestic terrorism statute. The center said that such a statute could be used against dissidents, communities of color, or political opponents. Here are my questions. Should this very stern warning give us pause when developing a plan to predict and confront politically motivated hate? And how can we assure that strategies to predict, prepare, and prevent politically motivated hate in our communities do not fundamentally rest on the punitive reactions of law enforcement agencies or in the creation of prosecution databases? Moving to the second category, data. We know that victim underreporting and law enforcement under-identification of hate incidents or crimes are prevalent. In Massachusetts, as some of you said already, the reporting of hate crimes and events is absolutely voluntary. And most law enforcement agencies simply do not report hate crimes. As a result, state and city government data on hate crime is unreliable. Questions. Could the lack of reliable data affect our capacity to predict and prevent hate crimes? Are we underestimating or overestimating the number of hate incidents and crimes in Massachusetts? Are elected officials missing significant trends? What are the costs of relying on unreliable data? Can elected officials effectively allocate resources aimed at protecting targeted communities without accurate data? Can intervention and prevention programs be developed without reliable data? Third and last group, civil society. Again, it is well known that most hate crimes are not reported to law enforcement agencies across the United States. Questions. Could alternative non-prosecution agencies or groups at the local and state level become reporting sites for victims of hate-motivated crimes? And could it be argued that although hate crime frequently targets individuals and/or property, entire communities might be affected by those crimes, and that those communities might perceive that the lack of mandatory reporting means that they are not being protected, that they are in fact being left to defend themselves? And those are my questions, or my notes, as you prefer. Back to Mads.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you. Dean Edozi, do you have anything to add?
No. Thank you.
Mads, maybe you want to take a second and respond to a couple of those questions, and I would
Sure.
I'd like to throw a couple ideas out there too before we open to questions from the audience, and maybe parts of your team may want to respond as well.
Sure, and I would invite folks from the Trust Network to also jump in. The other two co-conveners are also here, which is great. Yeah, I mean, on the hate crime monitoring thing, a major part of our analysis, as you already saw, with geospatial data, hate crimes data, all the different data sets we pulled together, apart from all the events data analysis and all the mathematical modeling, all of these other stuff that we're doing, is really based on the idea that wherever you have a higher prevalence of hate crimes and hate groups, politically motivated hate, that you have a higher chance of domestic terrorism. And we are really shy in terms of labeling it that. In fact, a lot of the attacks on the power grid, etc., have actually been called vandalism, which we do not agree. These are acts of terrorism. If it was sort of a foreign group who did that, we would have no hesitation calling these acts of terror. So it really comes down to what you said, Professor, about mandatory collection of hate crimes, hate data. Mandatory meaning, it could be a combination of things, not just laws and regulations, but how do we get people who to feel comfortable sharing what happened to them, with an agency? How do we build that trust? How do we build that trust with law enforcement agents? This is part of our analysis and presentation as well. Is a lot of this is underreported, and whenever it's underreported, it's really the canary in the coal mine, really, for us. When it comes to understanding, what are these groups that are out there? For example, the Atomwaffen group, people are now starting to talk about it, but it was one of those hate groups, and it crossed over from the hate crimes, hate groups, neo-Nazi, white supremacist thing to organizing and planning, almost carrying out a massive terrorist attack with just 2 people involved. So we are at that stage where we really have to call more attention to this problem of hate crimes, politically motivated hate, and find ways to collect that missing data so we can actually drive the public policies, the public programming, and all of that. And in that regard, how do we kind of build bridges? This is one of the things that the Trust Network is also working on, bringing all the community-based mechanisms, the religious sector, all of these other groups into this fold, to building sort of an infrastructure across the nation until we are past this threat level, because we are seeing in the data, as we presented, a daily sort of escalation of the threat.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll respond real quickly as well. I'd also would really like to underscore what you mentioned, Reyes, about the potential impact of hate rights legislation, but more so hate rights data, hate crimes data collection on freedom of speech and freedom of association, and that that this data must be collected in a transparent environment, and that we also, I think, we encourage. It's important that there are multiple actors gathering this data, so that there are checks and balances, among the data gatherers themselves. And it's important that the Trust Network itself is expanding, and there are lots of other actors that are involved in this, and we're definitely encouraging other actors nationwide to do this, because it's important that there be multiple checks on this material. And I would also just really like to underscore your I think very important point about government not responding and not gathering this data as creating a problem in itself for communities that will suffer if we're not collecting this data properly. I would want to throw into that civil society itself, in terms of government has a obligation to be collecting this data, but civil society also has its own, I think, responsibility to engage where government cannot. And I want to underscore, some of the points Jack made about, the philosophy of these groups, because, the more the government responds to these problems, the more it fills their ideology of the government being taken over by the wrong people. So I think civil society actors, religious institutions, schools, universities like us and others have an important part to play in terms of trying to reach out to communities that are vulnerable, for potentially, being places where people that join these sorts of groups may be going, and trying to prevent them from joining and to try to stop, to try to undermine the appeal of these kinds of actions. Mads, did you want to have any of your team respond to any of these points before we open for questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, Mads. I have one comment with respect to underreporting that we just haven't really touched on yet, and that's just to keep in mind as we enter the 2024 election cycle. It's very possible that this underreporting will be exploited purposefully, and people may run on platforms that say hate crime is decreasing because FBI data demonstrates that, but it's important to know that that's in fact not true. And if you hear that happening, be that voice of dissent that says that's actually not what's happening here. So just something to keep in mind as we enter what's sure to be a very tense political cycle moving forward.
Great point, Kelsey. Anyone else want to share their thoughts, reactions? I did see a few questions. Why Oregon, for example? Oregon rose to the top when we did the frequency analysis with all the combined data sets. It rose to the top, and we found Oregon rising to the top in at least 3 different data sets. And then we did sort of even state analysis in several large cities, Oregon being one of them, Denver, Colorado, etc. And then we actually saw, starting in 2020 May, how things had really escalated in Portland. So we put together the chronologies of events and try to understand the events data in Portland as our way of developing a model. So that's kind of how that started. And we have now a lot of organizations like the Trust. Actually, there's not a lot of organizations like the Trust, but other organizations who are part of the Trust putting a lot of effort into Portland because of some of these indicators that they have also read.
So I have a question now. Thank you all. What a thrilling analysis and presentation, especially from the students. Excellent work, and thank you, Mads and Darren, for training our students in this kind of work, and thank you, Professor Reyes, for those sort of critical questions, the qualitative questions, bring meaning to this work. And so my question is about it looks like there's a high incident of political violence in the Northeast, and especially in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And how is that explained? Given the sort of progressive, blue state, values of the state.
That's a great question. I would draw your attention to the profiles that Robert Pape, who's a terrorism expert out of University of Chicago, did of 1,600 profiles of the January 6th attackers. And what he discovered was that these actually not from red states, actually from blue or purple states or counties who were employed, middle class, upper middle class. Some of them even had private jets to get to Washington, D.C. 90% of these individuals were unaffiliated to any of these right-wing groups. So this actually is one of the reasons why we are trying to raise this. It's not just the right-wing groups, with the banners. It's a much more societal level issue. And if you look at the demographic of the young men who committed some of these atrocities, like the Buffalo shooter, for example, it's a young white demographic, and they're feeling like they're losing power. Economically, they are not getting ahead. So there's a lot of underlying causes that, as social scientists, we need to keep in mind as well. as we fix this problem, sort of the root causes of it. So it's much more prevalent. And Darren had this great point that we did start the revolution in Boston. So I think that's another great point. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Mads. Thanks. I think I see that Parag has a question. Do you have your hand up, Parag? No, I might have been mistaken.
We also have Prabha and DG from the Trust Network, the co-conveners of the Trust Network. I don't know if you have any questions, anything to share about the Trust and your exciting work, because this has been done as part of the, throughout the US.
I think Prabha had to go, but DG, would you like to make a quick comment or?
Just gratitude for the work and the study. I've been typing notes as you've been talking, although I must admit I can't keep up with your speed. Your Northeast accents go very fast, but a lot of learning. So I'm just very grateful.
Thank you, and thanks for the work you do as well. Okay, well, maybe it falls to me to thank everyone as well. I want to express deep appreciation to the entire team, Jack, Kelsey, Christina, Karina, and of course Mads for leading us all in this effort. Reyes, thank you for your comments and for taking time to join us and for the questions you've asked, and thanks again to Kiki for bringing us all together. Just that, well, and real quick as well is to note that we do have quite a bit of this information, and more of this information is going on our website, which is at umb.edu/CPDD. So keep an eye on this space, and we will be in touch. I see one hand.
Before you sign off, maybe selfish to request, is this Madhwa, can we make this available on our Trust Network site as well? I mean, I really am overwhelmed with the work and would like to be able to publicize that, or is this more in-house?
We can publicize it. We're recording, and we will
Thank you.
translate it into a YouTube site and channel and post it, and we will share that posting with you.
Well,
Thank you. And I
hand.
apparently jumped Felix. I see a hand up. So thank you for letting me be selfish.
Thanks, DG. Felix, you had a question?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me here. I've been listening with keen interest because I think the study is actually very wide, and it covers a lot of things that I've learned a lot out of it. And I will also request that such kind of studies should be extended to our region. That's the Africa, so that we can encapsulate a lot of things out of what we use your study is.
And that's a great point. I think we are hugely Africa-centered, and I credit Darren for bringing me back into the early warning field after getting burned out in Sri Lanka. Kiki?
Yeah, no, I know we've concluded, but I just have a quick question for Reyes. So, I know that the mayor has been personally, a personal recipient of harassment and epistemic violence and threats to her life. I know that you're the Human Rights Commissioner on behalf of the mayor. So can you give us some sort of feedback on how she's dealing with this violence?
No, I'm sorry, but I can't give you feedback on that particular issue.
Okay.
But it is relentless. It continues, and it was at first believed that had to do with COVID and the vaccine, the mandate that all city workers be vaccinated, but it clearly is not the case.
Before I forget, I want to give a.
Are there policies that she is, putting forth, for you to, build, to depersonalize it, but there's an uptick, and so we're looking to see anything from her in the future regarding policies on this question.
I think in that sense, I can say that the Human Rights Commission is very interested. Boston Human Rights Commission is interested in studying this issue.
Good.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
Before I forget, I want to give a huge shout out to the Dean's Office for the initial DOFA grant that got us here. I don't know, Kiki, if you forgot that. And for Darren and Jeff also for giving me their students to initially start this project. And a huge shout out to MOPC that's actually been funding a lot of this work lately. I don't know if Susan is there, but if you are, thank you. So
she is. Yeah. No, thank you, Matt. Thanks for that. The impact of these little, funds are so great. Look at the work you're doing. So thank you for that recognition.
Thank you.
All right, let's close for real now. 6:04. But thank you all for
Thanks, everyone.
attending this event and sharing this knowledge with us. We have many more events coming up, and I hope you will attend as well. But thank you and go well. And now go enjoy your Valentine's Days. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's.
Thank you.